G'day folks, welcome to this review of Dean Essig's None But Heroes. This is the first title in the Line of Battle series, published in 2011 and published by MMP Games. It is part of that Line of Battle series, which has also seen the publication of Last Chance for Victory, focusing on Gettysburg, and To Take Washington, which focuses upon Jubal Early's 1864 campaign in the North. Now, in talking about None But Heroes, I'll also talk more broadly about the Line of Battle series. This will give you some insight into how the other titles in the series kind of work and what they feel like. None But Heroes focuses on the Battle of Antietam, 17th of September 1862. As I said, it's regimental scale, about 110 yards per hex, and the game proceeds in 15-minute turns, 15-minute increments. In each turn, units activate, they can move, fire, charge, and so forth. This is very much a layered game where you have narratives developing at sort of every level. You can focus on the actions of particular regiments and what they're doing to hold key locations. You can focus on their broader brigades and the narratives of these brigades moving on and fighting and holding off key ground and so forth. You can look at the divisions more broadly, and how these divisions activate and how the division commanders perform under fire and all these types of things. You can look at the corps level and how corps commanders could fail to accept orders and how they're struggling to seize their objectives as ordered by their army commanders. And you can take a step back and look at the broader sort of army narrative and the battle narrative and what's happening. Because of these different layers, the games work really well from small scale scenarios through to large battles, and they are really quite different experiences. With the smaller scenarios, you're focusing upon particular fighting, such as around the cornfield or the sunken road at Antietam. And you really are focused on the nitty-gritty details of these regiments moving and looking for line of sight for your artillery, and focus all your efforts on seizing those objectives, surviving. When you play through the larger scenarios and the sort of the battle campaign that runs through the whole day, the 17th of September, it's a completely different story. Or rather, there are layers added to that story as you begin to add corps commanders and wing commanders in some cases, and the army commanders. This is because the Line of Battle series really focuses your attention on issues of command and control. To engage in combat, you need to begin with your army commander, McClellan, trying to issue an order. Now, he needs to make a command roll to issue this order. If he fails, he has to wait till the next turn, the next 15 minutes. If he succeeds, you have to literally write the orders out, give instructions to Burnside and Cox's 9th Corps to seize a particular objective, and explain how that will be done. It takes time for these orders to be communicated to Burnside. Once it arrives at Burnside, he needs to then roll to accept the orders. He needs to pass those orders on, and then Cox needs to accept these orders, and then he passes it down to the division commanders, who then need to accept the orders. And it can take time for these orders to begin to be implemented, and the various divisions within that corps may accept and start moving off and striving to achieve the objectives before other divisions have even activated and are aware of these orders. These factors, the passing down of orders, really puts you first and foremost in the perspective of that army commander with those larger scenarios. You are thinking, as McClellan, about where to send your corps and how to achieve your objective and what is going to happen. And you're almost thinking about an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours ahead what might evolve on the battlefield. It's not just there's a gap there, I'll go plug it. You're thinking, okay, if I send this corps over here, there may be a gap developing here. I need to send this corps into support or a corps into help with reserve in case something happens. I'll move this corps over here in case we're attacked over there. There's all these sort of just in cases, and it creates that, I guess, that anxiety and uncertainty and fear that McClellan may have felt on the 17th of September. That is really, when you play the full battle, where you're thinking. It's the level of your thinking as the army commander. Certainly, once the orders are passed down to divisions, you begin to move these divisions and the regiments and brigades out, and you are in control of those, but they have to follow their objectives. They have written orders, and they need to follow those orders and achieve their objectives. And once they've achieved their objectives, in effect, their attack order ends, and they'll hold their ground. So there are layers, as I said, of narratives evolving. the army commander giving orders, the corps moving to an area, the brigades and divisions, how they're getting things done, and then the regiments. And it's fascinating how the many different stories that evolve over the course of playing through this full battle. There's the fighting for the cornfield, the sunken road, the heights, the roads, key locations and bridges and fords and so forth, all happening sort of simultaneously. And it shifts your attention all over the place. But that attention to that broad detail and the orders isn't as evident in the smaller scenarios. In the smaller scenarios, you're given orders for these units, and you're really working through the implementation of those orders. You might have a small scale conflict, and you're just focusing on the movement of those regiments and brigades and perhaps a couple of divisions where you don't have to worry about issuing orders. And you can really just focus your attention on moving, firing, kind of getting the job done. This means that there's really a lot of gaming within the one title, within just None But Heroes. There are 4 smaller scenarios and 4 large campaign scenarios covering the day of battle, mid-morning, the early afternoon, and of course the day after, the 18th of September. All of these are very highly replayable, particularly the large battle scenarios. There's a sense here that what happened on your playthrough of the 17th of September on one day may be very different to your next setup and playthrough. You've got a lot of choice about what you do with your corps, where you send them. Particularly as a Union player on the attack. The Confederates, of course, are defending at Antietam, and they have sort of slightly more control over their forces, but of course they're outnumbered and in trouble trying just to hold their ground and survive. In terms of the line of battle series and how it works, it conveys a very historical sense of Civil War battles via a range of rules. It is not, I mean, it is a monster game, and I would certainly put it at the heavy end of the scale, but the rules are very well presented. It is very clear and kind of easy to grasp the fundamentals, such that reading through the rules, I was up and playing quite quickly and easily with the smaller scenarios. There are some complexities when it comes to line of sight and the order system. They're probably the 2 most complex elements of the game. Things like movement, rolling to close, zones of control and sort of facing and combat, morale, working with the morale checks, they are all fairly straightforward systems. The fundamentals of movement and combat is all pretty straightforward. Things get complicated mainly when you start to look at the bigger picture, when you start to implement lines of sight initially. The first couple of scenarios I played through, the smaller scenarios, I struggled with line of sight. I was trying to sort of work out the formula. And I think there are kind of two different ways you can approach this. You can look at every battery that's firing and do it in an exact calculation. Pretty soon, after playing over these smaller scenarios, you begin to understand sort of where the avenues of sight are and where these batteries can see from and where to position these batteries so they have the best line of sight. You begin to kind of eyeball the barriers that ridges put up, or how trees block line of sight. You can see that quite easily. You kind of get your eye into the map. So what initially looks like a very confusing line of sight system, and it is initially a very confusing line of sight system, gradually evolves to a system that works quite smoothly. And by the time I was playing the full battle, I had no concerns about line of sight. There are similar concerns with orders and commands and how these are passed on, and these are particularly complicated by the many exceptions provided by the title rules, the Number Heroes exclusive rules. There are various special commands and issues with seniority and special formations that can be formed and that are formed, and that complicates things a little bit. I had a little crib sheet where I took some notes and worked through that, but that also sort of is a step up from the smaller scenario, another little added layer. And for new players in particular, as I was a new player come to this series, it can be a struggle to wrap your head around the big picture approach you need to take, about needing to plan ahead 2 to 3 hours in advance, and about kind of when you look at a leader and you see that they have 0 command value, recognizing that it may take this division commander many hours before they accept their orders. Basically, when you issue orders or when you accept orders or pass them on, you need to roll 2d6 and you need a 10 or more modified by their command rating. If they've got a 0 command rating, you need a 10 or more on those dice, which is relatively low odds, so hard to achieve. Leaders can, of course, roll for initiative as well, but that's also quite difficult with a 0 rated command leader. They'll need a 10 on 2d6 as well. All these things, appreciating the delays in issuing orders and implementing these orders and moving out from these orders takes time to appreciate as a new player. Okay, so I've mentioned movement and combat and how they all work quite easily. Units face hex sides, they don't face hex vertices. I pointed out in my comparison video between Line of Battle and Great Battles of the American Civil War. Fire combat is relatively easy to implement. Basically, when you look at a counter, you'll have a couple of different features. First of all, if they're on this side, they're in line formation. If they're on the reverse, they're in column. On this side, and they're mostly on this side when they're engaged in combat, you'll have the type of weapon they're using. Typically, it is either a rifled musket or a smoothbore musket. You'll have the strength of these forces indicated by SPs. You can see here we have a 7 strength unit and a 5 strength unit. Different weapons have different ranges, and these are pretty easy to grasp. There's not a lot of weapons. These are the 2 most type of small arms weapons you'll see, those rifled muskets and smoothbores. They have ranges of 4 and 2, and then modified. The fire is modified over range. When you are firing, you simply consult the combat table, look at how many SPs are firing, modify that mainly by range. There are some other modifiers as well, like if the target is disorganized, if they're firing in their rear, if there's any protective terrain. You roll 2d6, check to see the result. It'll most commonly be either a morale check or 1 hit. You inflict hits on the enemy, they conduct a morale check. Now when you conduct a morale check, you look to see what the morale rating is of the unit. In this case, we have an A-ranked morale and a B-ranked morale. Once again, you roll 2d6, check the morale chart, apply modifiers for things like if they're small, shaken, wrecked, if they're adjacent to what's called a cowardly legs marker, and you find the final result and apply the effect. Now, this is a brilliant way to model morale and the effects of morale on infantry regiments during the American Civil War. These aren't just, they don't just fail morale and then break and run away. There are these subtle sort of shifts in their morale state. They become shaken and they just back off from the enemy. They can become shaken and lose some steps as stragglers, as men run away, but the regiment retains sort of its formation. They can become more heavily disorganized and begin to retreat 3 or 4 hexes, begin to lose 2 or 3 steps. For A-ranked units, the worst that can happen, these guys never rout. The worst that can happen, the very worst result is disorganized, back 3 spaces with 2 losses. For a D-ranked unit, the worst result they can suffer is routed, back 6 spaces with 4 losses. So there are really significant differences in the effects of morale on these units based on their morale rating. Most of the time, because it's, most of the time in combat, you'll be rolling sort of 7 is an average on 2d6 plus or minus some modifiers. You'll be rolling around that 7, 8, 9, 10. And these results are very subtle. As I said, just shaken back 1, units get a bit scared and they pull back away from the front line and then they re-engage and then they pull back again. And it's a great way to model that historical environment where the front lines sort of move and shift and waver. There are important leader effects on these morale modifiers. A good leader can basically keep an A-ranked unit in the line forever. There are leader losses as well. So if a leader is stacked with a regiment that takes a loss, they have to roll for leader loss. It's a slim chance. Basically, in most cases, you'll need a 10 or more on 2d6. But of course, if that unit is taking many losses, you may be making a lot of leader loss checks. You also need to roll to close, and I mentioned this earlier. When you approach enemy forces, when you move into the hex adjacent to the enemy, you need to make a roll to close check, basically rolling a d6. An A-ranked unit will pass this check on a 2 or more, B-ranked unit on a 3 or more, C-ranked on a 4 or more, and so on. So it becomes more and more difficult to get these relatively low morale units to close with the enemy. But again, a good leader can help that. The same system is used for charging. So if that unit wants to charge, they need to roll to close again into the enemy hex. And it's a very nice, quick system for charging that works, again, really well in conveying the sense that it's modelling Civil War combat and Civil War charges. And again, during a charge, you'll have what's called an opening volley, then a morale check basically for the defender to see if they stand their ground, and you apply those morale rules. All of these things, movement, rolling to close, charging, small arms fire, morale, they all work together really nicely in a very smooth, quick flowing system. I was midway through, I think, the first scenario, and I really grasped how this all worked. Not that I didn't make mistakes, but I understood how it worked and it flowed really well. There are issues of command as well. I mean, regiments need to stay close to their brigades, which need to stay close to their divisional leaders within their corps, following those orders. So everything sort of works together. You can't just send off these divisions here and there wherever they want. They need to stick together. All of these rules come together, as I said, and as I really want to emphasize, creates just that feeling that you are the Civil War army commander, moving your forces, ordering your forces around. As I said, though, there are layers of experiences, layers of narrative developing from the smaller scenarios right up to the large. Bringing this all together, look, None But Heroes does a remarkable job of conveying a feel for the Battle of Antietam. It can be frustrating at times. And in particular, two things I haven't mentioned yet are what are called fluke stoppages and attack recoveries. During the larger scenarios and the full battle, every turn, every 15 minutes, every division needs to make a roll for what's called a fluke stoppage. And this reflects the chaos of battle, the uncertainty and fluke mishaps in moving forces around, which happened historically. So you roll 2d6, and if you roll a 6 or more, or a 4 or more if you've got a reserve, typically a 6 or more, the unit is fine, nothing happens. So most of the time, they'll be fine, they'll continue to follow their orders. If you roll a 5 or less, if you fail that roll, you need to make another roll with 2d6 and compare this with the leader's command value. If you fail to roll higher than that number, that division suffers what's called a fluke stoppage. They just become panicked or uncertain, or they get confused, and they pull back away from the front and retreat to a safe area behind the lines. At that point, they are inactive. They're no longer following orders, and they then, to resume the attack, need to make what's called an attack recovery. And this is just as difficult, if not more difficult. They need to roll an 8, 9, or 10 or more, depending on how many losses they've suffered in the game. If they pass that, they need to make a roll based on their leader command value, and they need to roll very well to make this attack recovery and resume the attack. With that pass, they can once again begin to follow orders and move up to the front line. A lot of you are probably thinking, that sounds really frustrating. Why my divisions are engaged in combat, they're about to break through, as happened a couple of times in Antietam, and suddenly they suffer this fluke stoppage and they pull back. This is frustrating. If you're the army commander commanding those forces, you're about to break through and they suddenly pull back away from the lines. It's frustrating, but it reflects the chaos of the events and the chaos of command, the uncertainty. And again, you are in the mindset of, for example, McClellan trying to issue these core orders to move out and trying to get the divisions rolling, and they're confused and they're heading in the wrong direction, or they misinterpret orders. Well, they just become confused and just stop where they are and pull back to a safe location. Again, this pushes your mindset towards that view of McClellan and the need to, for example, if you have reserves, they modify that die roll to make it less likely they'll suffer a fluke stoppage. All of these elements, whilst frustrating, convey the sense of being that frustrated army commander and conveying a sense of the historicity of this system and the sense that you are kind of accurately simulating, I guess, the Battle of Antietam. It is certainly very heavily on the simulation side of that game versus simulation spectrum. The order system, these fluke stoppages, attack recoveries, they simulate the chaos of war. And as I said, it can be really frustrating in those moments. But then 15 minutes later, 30 minutes later, you kind of begin to appreciate what that is modeling, and adds to the value of the experience. Basically, the Union outnumbers the Confederates roughly almost 2-1. And if McClellan had full control over all these forces, he could send them all in and utterly destroy the Confederates. So all these factors, the Union on the attack, the relatively poor command ratings of Union forces compared to the Confederate divisional leaders in particular, their increasing likelihood of suffering this fluke stoppage, it conveys a sense of Antietam and what was actually happening. The delays to Burnside's wing or corps and his attacks on the lower bridge happened historically, and it reflects by all these elements, the orders, the fluke stoppages. Everything models the situation really nicely. So again, I think I'm repeating myself, but bringing all these factors together, the Line of Battle series and None But Heroes does a remarkable job in putting you in the footsteps of those commanders and helping you to understand, I guess, how they felt, and the fear and the uncertainty and hoping for the best and issuing these orders and sending them down the line with runners, but then just kind of not quite knowing what's going to happen. There is no certainty. You have no assurance that a division is actually going to follow your orders and attack. They could become sort of disrupted and head in the wrong direction per the special rules for numbered heroes. So look, folks, as I said, this is a monster game. It is very heavy. The smaller scenarios you can easily complete in 1 to 2 hours. They are very replayable. The larger battle, look, 2 experienced gamers could probably play through the full battle in maybe a weekend. Maybe a full day if they're moving very fast, but you're looking at probably 12 to 20 hours for the full battle. Of course, one of the great things about the Line of Battle series is you can apply the same series rules across, at present, the 3 different titles covering Antietam, Gettysburg, and Early's campaign in 1864. And as I said, easy to get to grips with, easy to get the fundamentals, to play through the couple of small scenarios. They're a nice way to ease yourself into the system, and then once you're comfortable, you can move up to the full battle and appreciate the full chaos of army level command and trying to get your corps to do what you want, and yelling at Burnside, who just will not accept those orders. When I played through the Battle of Antietam, it took 2.5 hours between issuing those orders to Burnside and him getting his first division to begin to move out. The others took probably another hour before they were moving out. And again, it was frustrating at the time, but then you look back and you think, well, that was a fascinating story. Just that sort of southern half of the flank. So folks, look, if it is, as I said, was published in 2011, if you find a copy, I highly recommend it. It is an amazing experience of the Battle of Antietam and of American Civil War combat. Highly recommended if you're looking for that relatively heavy, complex, broad scale of simulating regimental conflict during the American Civil War. That is Dean Essig's None But Heroes, part of the Line of Battle series. Hope that's been informative. Thanks everyone, and take care.